Listen closely, for the winds of the north were beginning to stir, and with them rose the banners of a new empire. When Ling Han ordered the armies of the Great Ling dynasty to march northward, it was not merely the ambition of a ruler seeking to expand his dominion. Beneath that grand campaign lay an older story, one steeped in resentment, unfinished battles, and a wound that had festered for 20 long years. The target of that buried hatred was the Winter Moon sect. At the heart of this matter stood Ling Dongxing, father of the emperor himself. For decades he had cultivated with unwavering resolve, yet his path had halted at the peak of the spiritual pedestal tier. According to the natural pace of cultivation, it might have taken another 10, perhaps even 20 years before he could cross the threshold into the flower blossom tier. But time was a luxury neither father nor son could afford. The storm gathering over the world would not wait for slow cultivation. Fortunately, Ling Han was no ordinary cultivator. He had once been the Alchemy Emperor. If talent alone was not enough, then there were other methods, pills. In Ling Han's possession now rested nearly 100 stalks of the legendary dragon blood tyrant ginseng. Each one a treasure that could shake the hearts of heaven-tier experts. Only a few had been preserved for planting. The rest had been refined into medicinal power, capable of overturning fate itself. With those miraculous pills, Ling Dongxing forced open the gates of the flower blossom tier. And that was only the beginning. As the father of the emperor of the Great Ling dynasty, Ling Dongxing now possessed something even more formidable than cultivation alone, the power of the nation itself. As the empire expanded, the fortune of the land gathered like rivers flowing into the sea. With that power reinforcing him, Ling Dongxing's strength rose beyond what ordinary cultivators could imagine. With such backing, could Ao Feng still hope to defeat him? Before the army advanced, Ling Han made one final detour. His destination was the old mine in Fire Country, a cursed land where countless powerful beings had once been buried beneath the earth. Rumors whispered that those buried below were not entirely dead, and that the place might hold clues to the cultivation methods of the underworld. If those secrets truly awakened, they could open a gateway between worlds. That possibility alone made the place a disaster waiting to happen. Ling Han was racing against time. He had to tear open the heavens before the 5 great sects of the immortal realm made their move, and before the creatures beneath the earth rose into the living world. When he arrived at the mine, he was greeted by a sight that made even him pause. A gigantic silver spider emerged from the shadows. Its enormous legs pierced the ground like divine spears, and its body shimmered beneath the pale glow of the moon. The creature lifted its head toward the sky, as though breathing in the moonlight itself, drawing in its essence to strengthen its cultivation. As Ling Han's perception deepened, so too did his unease. The spider's aura was terrifying. It stood at the level of a 15-eyed great corpse king, a monster of dreadful power. Most likely, the creature had simply wandered out to cultivate beneath the moon, and Ling Han had stumbled upon it by coincidence. Judging by its indifference, the spider had no interest in him whatsoever. Still, Ling Han silently calculated his strength. The higher one's cultivation climbed, the harder it became to challenge enemies beyond one's realm. After stepping into the deity transformation tier, Ling Han's normal combat strength could now reach roughly 1 star of the heaven tier. It was impressive, but nowhere near the overwhelming advantage he once enjoyed when he first reached the spiritual infant tier, when he could rival 9 stars of the deity transformation. However, Ling Han was no longer merely a cultivator. He was the emperor of a nation. Within his own territory, he could draw upon the fortune of the land. That power alone granted him an additional star of strength, and that was only after unifying the desolate north. If he succeeded in conquering the entire northern region, the power of the nation might raise his strength by 5 stars or more. And if one day he united all 4 great regions of the world, 10 stars of enhancement might not be impossible. Of course, that assumed his body could survive wielding such overwhelming power. There was also the Black Tower. If he drew upon the tower's power infusion, his strength could temporarily leap into the shattering void tier. But even then, the desolate north was simply too small. Its national power barely mattered when measured at that terrifying realm. After weighing all possibilities, Ling Han reached a simple conclusion. He could not defeat the Silver Spider. With a quiet shake of his head, he abandoned the thought of investigating further. Using the Black Tower's power here would be a waste. Just as he prepared to leave, something else caught his attention. The mine looked different. Normally the place was shrouded in eerie black mist, but now the fog had grown denser than ever. It swirled thickly through the air like liquid ink, heavy enough to make one's skin crawl. For a moment, Ling Han stood still. Was something stirring beneath the earth? He strained his ears. Soft whispers seemed to echo from every direction, like countless voices murmuring from the darkness. Yet no matter how hard he listened, the words remained indistinct, like ghosts conversing in another realm. A chill crept into his bones. Without sufficient power, this place was not somewhere one should linger. Ling Han turned and left. Soon after, the banners of war were raised. The massive army of the Great Ling Dynasty began its march toward the north, launching a full invasion. Their destination, Fallen Moon Forge. Along the way, Ling Han revealed another identity that shook the entire region. He was a heaven-grade alchemist. The reaction was immediate. Wherever the army passed, the Alchemist Society surrendered first. To them, a heaven-grade alchemist was no mere cultivator. It was a living god of alchemy. If such a figure asked for their allegiance, how could they possibly refuse? With the Society's immense influence, countless cities surrendered without a single battle. Yet conquest itself was never Ling Han's true goal. For cultivators, the greatest law was simple. Power ruled all. With enough strength, submission became natural, and serving a heaven-grade alchemist was hardly an insult. Thus, the army advanced like a tide across the land. Only 7 days later, they arrived before the towering mountain gates of the Winter Moon Sect. Ling Han gazed up at the familiar peaks. The last time he had stood here, he had needed the Black Tower's power just to match a spiritual infant-tier expert. Now things were different. His ordinary strength alone had already reached the Heaven tier, almost matching the peak of his previous life. And if he invoked the Black Tower's power, he could rival the Shattering Void tier. Destroying this sect would take little more than a flick of his finger. A young man stepped forward respectfully. "Your Majesty, shall we begin the attack?" This man was Jin Wuji. Years ago, the two had met in Daiyuan City, even clashing because of Jin Wuji's younger brother. While others had traveled to the Winter Moon Sect to cultivate, Jin Wuji had chosen a quieter life, marrying a beautiful wife and settling down. But when Ling Han returned and raised his banner, Jin Wuji joined the army without hesitation. His cultivation had only just reached the spiritual ocean tier, far too weak to matter in Ling Han's eyes. But strength was not what Ling Han valued here. Trust was. Thus, Jin Wuji had been given an important position. Many of Ling Han's old acquaintances were still within the Winter Moon Sect. That was another reason this sect had become his first target. Ling Han nodded calmly. "Small Rock," he said, "you will lead the charge." With a thunderous roar, the rock spirit surged forward. The creature had already advanced into the deity transformation tier. As a spirit born of the 5 elements themselves, its natural strength was monstrous. Its combat power rivaled even the peak of the deity transformation tier. It threw a single punch. Boom! The Winter Moon Sect's mountain protection formation shattered like fragile glass. Chaos erupted across the sect. At that moment, Ling Han invited someone forward. Ling Dongxing. This battle belonged to him. The grudge between him and Ao Feng had endured for 20 years. With the rock spirit tearing through their defenses and an army of millions surrounding the mountains, the Winter Moon Sect's will to resist collapsed instantly. In the martial world, strength was the only law. Faced with such overwhelming power, their fighting spirit crumbled. As the army shouted in unison that those who surrendered would be spared, weapons clattered to the ground one after another. The entire sect surrendered. Soon, a battered figure was dragged forward. Ao Feng. Long ago, Ling Han had destroyed his spirit base, leaving his cultivation frozen at the early stage of the Flower Blossom tier. The moment he saw Ling Han, hatred exploded from his eyes. "If that hadn't begged for your life back then," Ao Feng roared, voice trembling with rage. "If I had simply killed you that day, none of this would have happened." Before he could continue, a heavy fist smashed down. Yuan Cheng's punch slammed into the back of Ao Feng's head, forcing him to crash to the ground. "How dare you speak so rudely before His Majesty?" Ling Han merely glanced at Yuakai Yu and his family nearby in greeting. There would be time to deal with old acquaintances later. Now, something more important had to happen. Ling Dongxing stepped forward. His eyes burned with the fire of 20 years of resentment. "Ao Feng," he said slowly, "fight me. If you defeat me, I will spare your life." Ao Feng laughed coldly. 20 years ago, you were a defeated dog. You are the same now, and you always will be." Ling Dongxing's sword gleamed as he stepped forward. His fighting spirit surged toward the heavens. "Then come. Let us settle this. Listen well, for the tale that follows is one steeped in long-buried hatred and the settling of a grudge that had festered for 20 years beneath the weight of time." When Yuan Chenghe heard the request, he instinctively turned toward Ling Han, confusion flickering in his eyes. After all, the prisoner standing before them was none other than Ao Feng, a man whose name had been carved into Ling Dongxing's life with blood and bitterness. Ling Han gave a small nod. That single gesture carried absolute confidence. He was telling Yuan Chenghe to release the chains. Even if the situation spiraled out of control, even if Ao Feng proved stronger than expected, Ling Han possessed the power to intervene at any moment and pull his father back from the jaws of death. Understanding this silent assurance, Yuan Chenghe grinned. He stepped forward and removed the restraints binding Ao Feng. Thus, fate allowed two enemies, whose feud had burned quietly for 2 decades, to face each other one final time. Ling Dongxing lifted his hand. With a flash of dark light, the demon birth sword appeared in his grasp. This blade was no ordinary weapon. Ling Han himself had placed it into his father's hands. A level 10 spirit tool, whose very edge seemed capable of slicing the heavens themselves. Even though Ling Dongxing lacked the ability to awaken the sword's internal formations, the weapon's inherent sharpness alone defied reason. Ling Dongxing was not a martial prodigy. At best, he possessed moderate talent. Even under Ling Han's meticulous guidance, he had only managed to condense a single strand of sword chi, but that one strand was enough. Because when that flash of sword chi merged with the terrifying edge of the demon birth sword, the destructive power unleashed became something that ordinary cultivators simply could not endure. After all, sword chi drew strength from 2 sources, the cultivator wielding it and the weapon carrying it, and what weapon could surpass a level 10 spirit tool? The battle erupted. Ling Dongxing and Ao Feng collided like thunder striking thunder. Old hatred burst forth like a volcano long buried beneath the earth. Sword chi slashed through the air as origin power roared like crashing waves. Every strike they exchanged carried the weight of 2 decades of resentment. By all logical measures, Ao Feng should have held the advantage. He had stepped into the Flower Blossom tier years earlier than Ling Dongxing, and possessed far greater experience in wielding that realm's power. His mastery of the sword was also superior. He had already condensed 9 flashes of sword chi, and stood only 1 step away from 10. Once he crossed that threshold, his sword chi might transform into the far more terrifying sword ray. Compared to that, Ling Dongxing's single strand of sword chi seemed almost pitiful. Yet the demon birth sword changed everything. When Ling Dongxing's sword chi erupted from the blade, it carried a savage force that crushed Ao Feng's attacks like brittle glass. Each collision ended the same way. Ao Feng's sword chi shattered instantly, unable to withstand the terrifying power of the spirit tool. Clang, bang, pang! The battle raged on. Strangely, the longer Ling Dongxing fought, the stronger he became. Over the years he had consumed countless spiritual herbs. Much of their medicinal essence had remained dormant within his body, never fully absorbed. Now, stirred by the violent circulation of energy during battle, that dormant power awakened. Like a hidden reservoir bursting open, the stored essence surged through his meridians. His strength replenished itself again and again. Ao Feng, however, faced the opposite fate. His spirit base had already been destroyed. Without it, he could no longer draw spiritual chi from heaven and earth to replenish his origin power. The only method left to him was swallowing alchemical pills. But pills carried a cruel limitation. The first dose might grant full strength. The second would weaken slightly. The third even less. Each pill's effect diminished further and further. As time passed, Feng's strength began to wither. Ling Dongxing, meanwhile, only grew more vigorous. 2 hours passed. Sweat soaked Feng's robes as exhaustion crept into his limbs. His breathing grew ragged, yet he refused to beg for mercy. He understood clearly. Neither Ling Dongxing nor Ling Han would ever spare his life. If death was inevitable, then he would drag his enemy into the abyss alongside him. With a savage roar, Feng launched attack after attack filled with suicidal ferocity, every strike aimed not only to kill, but to perish together. But time had changed everything. 5 years ago, Ling Dongxing might have accepted such an ending. But now he had a wife, a son, even a grandson. How could he throw his life away for this bitter enemy? Thus Ling Dongxing abandoned reckless offense and fortified his defense, calmly waiting for the inevitable moment when Feng's strength finally ran dry. That moment arrived. Feng staggered, his energy exhausted. Hatred twisted his face as he glared at the 2 men before him. "On the road to the netherworld," he rasped, voice thick with venom, "I will be waiting for both of you." Then, a flash of steel pierced his chest. The demon birth sword thrust straight through his heart. The power of a level 10 spirit tool annihilated every trace of life within him. Even a heaven-tier cultivator might not survive a direct strike like that. How much less someone merely standing at the flower blossom tier? Feng collapsed. The feud that had haunted 20 years of life ended in a single silent breath. Ling Dongxing stared at the fallen corpse and sighed deeply. For so long he had believed revenge was impossible. Feng possessed greater talent, stronger backing, and the formidable support of the Winter Moon sect. The gap between them should have grown wider with every passing year. But fate had gifted him something greater than talent. He had a remarkable son, Ling Han. Yet despite defeating Feng, Ling Han showed no interest in slaughtering the man's entire family. Feng's children were spared. Ling Han had never enjoyed needless bloodshed. As long as others did not cross his bottom line, he preferred reason over violence. Truthfully, Ling Han was also somewhat lazy. Once he discovered Helian Xunshui's astonishing talent for leadership, he promptly handed over the responsibility of governing the nation to her. After all, she had once belonged to the royal clan of the Northern Sea. Compared to the vastness of the Northern Sea, the territory they now ruled was laughably small. Helian Xunshui accepted the task eagerly. In her eyes, the throne would one day belong to her son anyway. Helping manage the kingdom now was simply preparing the path for his future. Of course, she concealed her identity from outsiders. By consuming a disguise pill, she altered her appearances so that members of the sea race would never recognize her. As for warfare, that responsibility rested in the capable hands of Yuan Chenghan Li Fengyu. With those 2 serving as great generals, and with the terrifying rock spirit standing behind them, there was hardly a corner of the northern region that could resist their advance. Internal affairs were managed, external battles were handled. Ling Han therefore concluded that he had nothing left to worry about. Why should a leader exhaust themselves doing everything personally when capable followers existed? Thus, he happily settled into the comfortable role of issuing orders while others carried out the labor. Still, he set one crucial principle. The hearts of the people must be pacified. Stability must come first. Because Ling Han's ultimate goal was not territorial expansion, it was the power of the nation itself. Only when the people were loyal would that mysterious national power grow strong. Under his command, the Great Ling Nation began massive recruitment efforts. The terms offered were generous beyond expectation. At the same time, Ling Han promoted policies to improve the livelihood of ordinary citizens. Every person would have the chance to cultivate, even if only to the 4th or 5th layer of the body-refining tier, so they could remain healthy and strong. A nation where everyone possessed some cultivation would naturally flourish. Not long afterward, Zhu Xuan made a sincere request. She hoped Ling Han would visit the Half-Moon sect. If the sect could be persuaded to join peacefully, unnecessary bloodshed could be avoided, and her conscience would rest easier. After all, that was once her home. Ling Han agreed. Thus he and Zhu Xuan departed together. Helian Xunshui remained behind to oversee national affairs. Lu Yutong and Li Xichan stayed with Ling Han's parents. Only Hu Niu, Rabbit, and the gold-seeking rat accompanied him. Little Ling Jianshui was still an infant who had not yet been weaned. Naturally, he remained with Helian Xunshui. However, Ling Han had thoughtfully captured several white jade cows that were still nursing. The milk of these demonic beasts was extraordinarily nourishing, perfect nourishment for a growing child. Helian Shunshui was thoroughly annoyed by this arrangement. Her chest might be slightly small, but she certainly had plenty of milk. Nevertheless, the journey began. Ling Han and his companions traveled for 7 days before finally arriving at the Half-Moon Sect. With Zhu Xuan acting as intermediary, their arrival was quickly reported to the sect's elders. Soon afterward, they were summoned. Ling Han demonstrated a fraction of his strength. That single display was more than enough to intimidate the entire sect. Moreover, everyone knew that Zhu Xuan would eventually become Ling Han's beloved consort. If the Half-Moon Sect pledged allegiance now, their standing would not decline in the slightest. Thus the sect's elders made a wise decision. Resistance would only lead to destruction. Surrender ensured survival, and perhaps even prosperity. The matter concluded smoothly. Everyone left satisfied. But Ling Han did not immediately return to the capital. Instead, he set his sights on another destination, Agriculture-Enclosed Mountain. This was the place where Zhu Xuan'er's master had once suffered a mysterious Dao injury. Years ago, Ling Han had been intrigued by the story, but his strength had been insufficient to investigate. Now, his battle prowess rivaled the heaven tier itself. Confidence filled his heart. 7 more days passed before they reached the westernmost frontier of the northern region. Beyond this land lay the barrier separating the north and west regions of the world. Before them rose a desolate and ominous location, Agriculture, Enclosed Mountain, and within it, Eaglewood Valley, a place whispered about in fearful tones, a forbidden land.